Some children will, at a very early age, as soon as they can talk, will tell you that they're being told that they're a girl when they're a boy, or they feel like a boy.
I most certainly believed in what they were telling us, that I was an ideal candidate for gender reassignment surgery. I regret trusting them.
I regret it. It was a waste of my money, it was a waste of my time. It was more time that I didn't do what I needed, address my dissociative symptoms.
We aren't the ones that came up with this radical new movement that is performing permanent physiological changes to children, with no evidence of any benefit.
I didn't feel like there was any support out there other than like a few friends online.
See on your site that you offer gender-affirming health programs. Do you offer detransition programs as well?
I can send it over to our gender-affirming care. We might.
We don't here. Let me send you over to our gender-affirming care team.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I've been helping detransitioners for years. What we realize is that people suffered from adverse childhood experience. They suffered from trauma as a child. My mom hit me with a fry pan starting when I was 2 years old. My dad hit me with a hardwood floor plank when I was 5 years old. My Uncle Fred sexually molested me when I was 8 years old, and my grandmother started cross-dressing me when I was 4. People are 19 times more likely to commit suicide after they go through the surgery and hormones. Telling parents, if they got a teenage girl, 12 or 13 years old, they say, well, would you rather have a dead girl or a live boy? Let them transition. Well, that's totally bogus. For every child they get hooked on hormones at an early age is about a $200,000 bonus to the pharmaceutical company. It's a huge bonus to the gender clinics. It's about money. Tides Foundation, you've got George Soros. If you go look up the money, it's all follow the money. The gender clinics admit that they're doing it for the money. They're not doing it to help anybody. I call it institutionalized child abuse. It's the worst thing that we could be. We're destroying an entire generation of children. And if you think there's the sisters and detransitioners now, I'm not going to be around because I'm 82, but in another 20 years, the numbers are going to be catastrophic. In 1979, they closed every gender clinic in the country because they were causing too much harm. Detransitioning, you're really not suffering. You're finally getting your life back. You're suffering when they filled you full of hormones and cut body parts off.
Do a lot of vaginoplasty and a lot of phalloplasty. Yeah, a lot of adolescents presenting for surgical intervention.
They needed trauma therapy. I use a system of helping people called ACEs. There's 10 ACEs. And even cross-dressing a kid is emotional and psychological child abuse. The problem is at the time you're doing it, it isn't manifested at that point. It takes years. People who identify as transgender, something happened to them in their early life that caused them to not like who they are. It's not even about gender. It's never been about gender. It's not about gender dysphoria. It's about things that happened to them. And they came up with these terms, gender dysphoria, in 2013 when it never was gender dysphoria. They did that and put it in the DSM as gender dysphoria so that they would have quick access to hormones and surgical procedures. And they could put down a number and have an insurance company pay for it. Because before that, it was called gender identity disorder, which required the therapist to find a disorder, whether it was body dysmorphia, schizophrenia, PTSD. The people that I work with are aware that something happened. We work through the detransition process with them.
How many of a percentage would you say have dealt with physical, mental, or sexual abuse?
70 or 80, maybe 80%. I've worked with a lady who works with prison parolees. It isn't that they all end up being trans. They end up being in prison, or they end up having an alcohol issue or a drug issue. It's just that some of the people end up identifying as trans because they ended up getting collected up by something on the internet, oftentimes anime, some game, pornography, TikTok.
I'm a male. I'm a man. I'm a he. I don't answer that.
No one can change their gender. They can change their persona. They can change what they look like. We can feminize a boy. We can masculinize a girl. We cannot change their gender. And that's what people realize when they get through the lies that are going on. They realize that they've been lied to. And so then they'll contact somebody like myself or someone else. What I went through was not easy. And it's made me be able to articulate and help people that other people have struggled to help because they understand where they've been.
You're exactly who you're supposed to be.
Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
No one can erase who you are.
I was always very non-conforming in terms of gender, but also just in terms of personality. And when I was 11, I was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. And I was also diagnosed with a hormonal disorder, polycystic ovarian syndrome. In combination, both of those things led to ostracization from peers, social isolation, depression, just overall a lack of meaning. Started experiencing emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse from a parent. That caused trauma. When I started learning about gender identity, it was pretty much the perfect vulnerability combination. On Tumblr, they were talking about the different gender identities, the different signs that you might be trans, about gender dysphoria. I really latched onto that. It made sense to me. I started identifying as genderqueer at first, which is a form of non-binary identity, because I had never fit into feminine roles or stereotypes, nor masculine roles or stereotypes. And so I felt like, okay, I'm this androgynous person. Around, mid-high school, I started having some relational issues because I had severe attachment wounding from parental abuse. I was attracted to unavailable people. I had codependency patterns, but they sort of led me on and used me and toyed with me kind of as a stepping stone to realizing that they were homosexual. I was meant to be a gay man instead of a straight woman. Starting around 18 is when I came out as a transgender gay man and took steps to socially transition, changing my pronouns to they, them, contemplating if I should pursue the medical procedures, which I was told were supposed to be the best treatment for gender dysphoria.
We're then able to help them refocus on strengthening and building that relationship with the child or family member.
And when I was 19, I went to a LGBT clinic and was given a high dose of testosterone, 200 milligrams per week to inject. And I was also diagnosed with gender dysphoria by my psychiatrist. I had a radical double mastectomy, and unfortunately, the testosterone made things much worse for my mental health and my social health. I had a mental breakdown on the testosterone, and the double mastectomy also did not relieve any pain or discomfort that I had with myself.
You see as a suicide rate that's associated with 19 times higher than the general population.
And so a couple more years went by and just more traumas continued to happen. And as I was trying to cope with what I, at 22, realized was actually PTSD. I was formally diagnosed with PTSD, and I started to awaken and realize that all of the symptoms of gender dysphoria, the relationship issues, the self-esteem was all related to having complex trauma from childhood abuse. And so I started realizing at that time which was about 2018, 2019, that I had made a mistake. When I was detransitioning, I really didn't have much of a support system at all. I really didn't have any support. Not healthy to detach from your body, because your body is you. Every single thing you've ever done has been inside your body, because of your body. You know, it's posited as this individual choice, this bodily autonomy, this personal liberation of self, when it's really a marketing scheme for vulnerable populations from the pharmaceutical industry, you know, government, and, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's so many threads that tie together that makes it a systemic, you know, institutional push for people to become disembodied, to, you know, resort to technology and pharma. Children are not developmentally mature enough to consent to these procedures, and they're also not developmentally to understand the implications of even the words that they're using. You know, they're just exploring the world. They need to go through a period of exploration, of fluidity, of identity, and trying on different things, and having a normal puberty and growth and development without interference from the medical industry.
How do we support those kids?
Follow their lead. If they say they want to be called a certain name, do it.
A few years back, I was dating a girl in the Bay Area. We fell in love. We started dating shortly after, and just a few months into us dating, she got pregnant. And we were both very happy about that, thankfully. And we never agreed politically. She always suffered from some mental illness problems, but always thought those are two things we could work through together. As the pregnancy went on, she started acting very volatile towards me, constantly threatening me that I wouldn't be able to see my son if I wasn't exactly who she wanted me to be, particularly in a political sense. And, you know, that was really hard to deal with on a day-to-day basis. A few months go on more, and she ends up breaking up with me, sending me a cease and desist letter from her attorney, which I respected. And I didn't know when my son was born. Found out about a week after from social media. And after that, 2 months after that, I filed in court, and took 13 more months just for me to meet my son. So I met him at 15 months old, and that was, you know, one of the best days of my life. From there, I moved to the Bay Area and was awarded half custody of him, which was a blessing. Some things happened. She started treating my son as non-binary and putting him in dresses and makeup and calling him they all the time. And that was a extremely uncomfortable thing to hear. I was worried about my son. Just made sure to teach him what reality is, that there's boys and girls, that he's a boy. He knows he's a boy. He'll always tell you he's a boy if you ask him.
Was she arrested at one point?
She got arrested for child endangerment, placed on a 5150 hold by the police, and that was with my son there. And that was, of course, very worrisome, so I presented all those things to court. I was also granted a restraining order on her for harassment and defamation of me. I get granted a 5-day trial, which is a very long time. A lot of people get a really short hearing, and their whole custody is decided just in that. Had all this evidence and police officers and body cam footage, and after the trial, the court rendered the decision to keep custody the same at 50-50 and ordered that my son would continue to see a doctor that was okay with treating kids as non-binary. In California, do their best to have both parents in a kid's life, which I think makes sense. In usual circumstances, I just think in mine, it's kind of an extreme case where my son is legitimately perhaps in danger because of his mom's mental health issues. And the court also ruled that they wouldn't make a decision on gender because I asked them to have us both treat him as a boy. And as far as the court and political aspects go, justice is supposed to be blind, at least. Everybody, in my particular case, I've seen a lot of people get canceled like that, and it ruins them, and they lose a lot of family and friends. But everybody knew that that was complete nonsense. Everybody had my back. All of my ex-girlfriends wrote letters to court for me, defending my honor. My son Sawyer will tell you he's a boy over and over again, confidently. He's 100% sure of it. He loves being a little boy. He loves rough and tumble play, playing in the mud, playing sports. I mean, he's as boyish as it gets. Well, there's a time when she took him to Disneyland, and he tells me a few months later, he's like, Dada, when I went to Disneyland, I couldn't go on the rides unless I wore my princess shoes. And when he tells me, he says, I couldn't go on the rides unless I wore my princess shoes. And you can tell he's like distraught by it. He's looking down. He's ashamed by it. He's saddened by it. It's obviously heartbreaking. And I tell him, you can go on all the rides in Disneyland in boy shoes, buddy. Don't let people force you to do things you don't want to do. But, it's obviously a really sad thing to hear when it's your own son that you love more than anything in the world. And when you love someone more than anything in the world, like you do your own child, you should want them to be happy with who they are. You should let your kids be gender neutral so that they can choose for themselves. Well, in my particular instance, if we grant that false premise, my son clearly, unequivocally states that he's a boy. So he's made the decision. So shouldn't that be respected because he says that he's a boy?
What do you fear the most in what's happening?
The thing I fear the most is that children are the most wonderful, innocent, amazing things in the world. They're the future. It's just heartbreaking that anyone would want to take that from them. I don't know how long it will take. I don't care how long it will take. I don't care how hard it is. I don't care how much pain and suffering I have to go through. He's worth it. I have a duty as a dad to do it, and I'm going to do it whatever it takes. No one's doing anything. No one's saying anything. Maybe the calling's on you, and you have to be the one to step up and speak out. And that's why I speak out as much as I can now.
What is a TERF?
In order to be a woman, you need to have been assigned female at birth or a biological woman.
If you're a radical feminist like myself, you're basically not allowed to talk about any of this stuff in the mainstream media. This issue is typically framed as being a fight between the big bad Christian right versus a small group of marginalized people. That is not what's happening. What is happening, in fact, is that all of trans, if you like, really is a top-down, heavily funded, industry-driven movement to abolish the material reality of sex. The whole concept of gender identity is incredibly homophobic because in order to protect the rights of same-sex attracted people, including lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals, we have to be able to acknowledge material reality of sex. And I think it's very important for people to understand that although it is typically painted as progressive to support, quote, trans, in fact, the entire movement is the most authoritarian, politically regressive, sexist, and homophobic agenda I have encountered in my lifetime, and it's fully embraced by the Democratic Party and by the cultural left.
Jill, Kamala, Doug, our entire administration sees you for who you are.
U.S. citizens will be able to choose X as the gender marker on their passport.
If you look more closely at that list of things that Soros is funding, or if you look at the list of things that are funded by the Arcus Foundation. So this is a foundation set up by a gay man named John Stryker, and Arcus is worth billions of dollars.
Philanthropy in a strategic way, and to be strategic, you have to have data.
But when you look closely at them, they have nothing whatsoever to do with actual gay rights advocacy. I looked at their 2022 funding grants. Every single one of them focuses on, quote, trans and or queer. Martin Rothblatt was born Martin. He is a multimillionaire and he's married to a woman, and he once spent a couple $1 million creating a robot replica of his wife.
I like to beautify. I want to leave the world a more beautiful place for my presence in it.
He has created an organization called Terrasem, which talks about encapsulating human thought and creating these things that he calls mindware.
Once you upload all of your thoughts, that is called a mind file.
which is online in the cloud data points about who we are as human beings. And he once published a book called From Transgender to Transhuman. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society, all of which encourage the use of puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones in minors. They all have very close ties to the pharma industry and to the biotech industry. Feminist professor Janice Raymond put out a book in 1979 called The Transsexual Empire, in which she essentially predicted everything that was going to happen. In 1994, she reprinted it with a new introduction. And in her 1994 introduction to The Transsexual Empire, she talked about the word transgender. And she warned everybody in 1994 that this word was going to completely change society, to further entrench sex stereotypes. What our society ought to be doing is accepting people who do not conform to sex stereotypes, including people who are same-sex attracted. Society should just accept that. It really shouldn't have a problem with violating sex stereotypes. That should be a good thing. But it's a very different thing to create this new word, transgender, and pretend that nonconformity with sex stereotypes needs to be medicalized. Womanhood already is being erased in society by the use of language like chest feeding or menstruator, the absolute worst, black birthing bodies. It's terrible, which is why I think it's very important both for radical feminists to keep speaking out in support of women and girls as a sex class, and also work with conservative-leaning women's organizations. Because at the end of the day, regardless of political opinion, women are women, and we're going to need to stand up for ourselves and for each other.
A brave group of children who have to lead a fight every day just to be themselves. This is a photo of my patient. Tyler was assigned female at birth, but at age 2, he started saying he was a boy, and his parents said, "We don't care if you experiment with our child. We will do anything for his mental health."
So I'm out here with my organization called Protect Texas Kids, and we're here because a clinic called Genesis was entirely created to basically take in kids who feel that they might be another gender and give them that care that they need for it.
This is unacceptable, the fact that this is becoming so normalized and that there's individuals pushing for this to the degree that they are.
Legislators, your senators, tell them that we need legislation that is going to be anti-transgender modification. They need to make this illegal.
The clinic was shut down, but recently a judge ruled that the doctor who founded the clinic, Dr. Lopez, could start taking new patients.
If you are trying to tell a child that they are not in the right body, how did that conversation even happen? How did it start? Where did it start? Did it start in the schools? Is it society is collapsing, is deteriorating? The moral fabric of our society is falling apart.
I'm looking at what the current administration is pushing for, the indoctrination they're doing to everybody, the division they're doing to everybody, and the stuff they're doing to our children, our future generation that needs to stop.
She was only allowed to continue care for existing patients, but now she's taking new patients as well. We decided to come out here today because obviously we disagree with that.
Transitioned when I was 13 years old. I'm now a junior in college, and this is a video for parents.
My daughter was socially transitioned into believing that she was a boy. She had always been a very girly girl. There had never been any indication that she was struggling with gender dysphoria. Initially, it was, the non-binary and all that stuff. And I just wrote it off as kids. But when her behavior started to change, and her personality started to change. That was when I got concerned. I started to notice some of the content that my daughter was looking at, and it was inappropriate. And when I addressed it with the school and with the other parents, that was when I said, okay, there's more to this. Autogynephiles talking to her in her chats and DMs, it just made me panic stricken, concerned about what they would tell her to do next. The TikToks and stuff and the Instagram, yes, that was very concerning. But when she got back to school, the outbursts and the rage of all of this got worse, and the self-harm was really bad. She would tell me, I can't talk to you. I can't talk to you because I can't trust you. And you never listen to me. She said, I'm not going to get top surgery just right away. I am never going to let you do that. She was just like completely deflated. Like she couldn't understand, why I wouldn't allow her to do such a thing. Okay, if I don't leave this state, I'm going to lose my daughter. I devised an escape plan very, very similar to the kind of escape plan that you would devise for domestic violence, to a safe environment in my hometown in Houston. I created this program to help her come to the realization of who she really is. And I didn't force it. I just kind of gave her the space to come to this conclusion and to see what's really happening. She's gender non-conforming because she is everything, because she is all these things, because she is a magical creature. So they told her because of that, then she's a boy. No, she's not a boy. She's a badass girl. When she gets dressed up in her heels and her earrings and puts her makeup on, she carries this huge switchblade in her purse. I mean, like, yeah, like it's all of those things. Open her eyes to see. Affirming reality. That's what we did. That's what I did for her. I showed her what was real in her life, who she is, and allowed her to be everything that she is, all that, all those big things, to let her to show her that, her container does not have to be wrapped up in any kind of package to be who she is. She can be who she is in the container she was born in. She doesn't need to modify it in any way. There are mothers out there who are really starting to get it, and they're starting to see, and they're starting to listen to their own instincts as parents. We want our children to be able to grow up and take care of themselves and think for themselves. But that's not what these indoctrination centers do. Our public school education has become a cesspool. And until we get a handle on it, it's going to continue. I have a way to help. I have a formula, and it would be wrong for me to not share that. And once I did, people started coming to me, they were coming to me, begging for my help. And that was when I said, okay, I'm gonna help as many people as I can.
I grew up a gay kid. Around middle school is when I really started to not suppress those emotions and feelings that I've been feeling since I was a kid. For some reason, I just did not want to grow into a man, trying to look like a female and presenting myself as a girl. The whole family weren't surprised by it. Like, I was so young, so of course, when you're that young, you get influenced and drove me to really do this transition and everything. In the back of my head, I knew that I was always going to be a man, but I just wanted to be perceived as a woman. But social media really made me hope, because a lot of people are on there talking about, trans women are women and stuff like that. So when I first transitioned, I thought I was actually a woman, and kind of delusional. I do regret transitioning at this young, because your body's growing and it's the most important stages of growing. And I just think back and I'm like, I shouldn't have done this to myself, because it really does a lot to you at that age. Because I started at 16 medically. I mean, I would say short term, it really helps you. But long term, as far as like health wise and how your health is gonna do in 10, 20 years, the treatment for gender dysphoria is a whole transition, which is changing a perfectly healthy body for aesthetic purposes. I've done research, and there is a lot of consequences and side effects about these hormones. From blood clots, messes up your body over time, and especially when you're young. And I don't want to like be one of those that's dead or not dead, but like having serious health problems, blood clots, whatever the case is going to be, and new information that I'm just finding out. And it is really, really concerning. A lot of teens are wanting to transition. A lot of them want to do this and that, getting surgeries this young, and it's so normalized, and it's concerning. When you make the plan to transition, of course, it's going to be like for life. That's why people detransition, because they think that it's going to do them right, their whole lifetime. But I just feel like it's a huge money grab. What involves the transition? First, hormones taken for life, that's money. And then surgeries, breast implants, and the bottom surgery is, it's never just one surgery and it's done. It's multiple revisions, multiple surgeries. They already have permanent damage done to them, and industry is aware of this, and they're using it. They're using it to further push this, and especially on kids when it is very clear, because with kids, they're going to be lifelong patients regardless. I've only taken the hormones. I haven't had any surgeries. Thank God for that. I could detransition, and even then, I'm still going to be a medical patient. I don't know how how my body's going to be. Yeah, the damage is done. I'm not understanding why people aren't looking at this and being like, this is mutilation. Like, this isn't normal. People are losing their sexual lives, their sex drive. They're losing so much of their natural bodies. How come y'all are making this the only option? And it just doesn't make sense to me. It's a mental illness, and people even argue with that it's not. It is evil. I believe it's so evil. Just seeing it every single day, the people who are suffering, the detransitioners who aren't being taken serious, saying all these negative stuff about them, when it's social media, the medical industry, and living off of people's vulnerability and suffering for their own benefit. You're literally taking away their natural right, have a healthy mind to become an adult, to make rational decisions in life. And now I'm seeing a lot of parents who are like supporting that and supporting LGBT a lot more. And of course that's good, but don't be medicalizing and chemically castrating and sterilizing your kids. How does it get to this point?
Kids are under attack! What do we do? I just want different protections for women versus men. This isn't it, telling us that women aren't real, that we don't exist, when every day we know that we have different needs when we're pregnant, when we could become pregnant, when we're menstruating, when we get our first period. We need privacy in a way that men just don't. And to be honest, any decent man also wants privacy from women too. So
don't let anyone tell you that women speaking publicly about their rights and their reality is dangerous, violent, or some kind of hate crime. This is a movement that is destroying our sense of reality, our language, and our ability to speak the truth. This is a movement that destroys everything it touches. Man's kids are under attack! Only females give birth. Only males have penises. Yes. There is no her cock, Omar. Yes. And don't let anyone force you to say otherwise. Trans rights are human rights. Trans rights are human rights. Trans rights are human rights.
Parts, not parts. Parts, not parts. Parts, not parts.
The erasure of the category of sex for women and girls as wholly embodied human beings into an abstract identity label that any man can claim as his, quote, identity is not only an assault on women's rights, but an assault on all of our humanity. What is happening to kids is larger than any one educator, larger than any one school curriculum. It's an ideology coming at them from all angles,
social media and entertainment, and it constitutes grooming. Grooming is the use of charm to normalize and desensitize increasing boundary violations over time. When do we want it? Now! What do we want? When do we want it? Now! The entire political left and most of our nation's educational and nonprofit institutions have been captured by this movement that erases our ability to name the ongoing atrocities occurring specifically against women and girls.
So for me, I think the most important part of women's rights is the right to our own spaces where we're physically safe, and then also politically safe. We have the right to be who we are and respect other people and have that same respect returned. That's all.
These people behave like a cult, and I think it's important to look at the way they behave rather than the words they say, because there are a lot of people who speak empty words. They're out here talking about hatred while behaving in a hateful way. Trans rights are human rights! Trans rights are human rights! Trans rights are human rights! So glad I'm not in that woke cult anymore, because I look at these people and I think they look not just like buffoons, but utterly possessed. Thank you, ladies, for coming out!
This is just a phase you're gonna outgrow.
I'm a girl!
There's something wrong.
My household was there was just a lot of violence going on, quarreling between my parents, also abuse coming from my elder brother, and physical, emotional, and sexual. The sexual abuse started when I was 6 years old, and it continued until I was like 8 or 9. And then after I brought it up with my dad, and he decided to pull me out of the house, place me into a hotel, and then from there I was transferred to a house, and then slowly but surely the other siblings, besides the one that abused me, the reason why I wasn't allowed to go outside and make friends, my dad did not trust any of these people. He thought they were out to get him. He would tell us not to eat people's food. They're going to poison us. Witches are following him. All of this. I don't think everybody in Nigeria is like that. It is cultural. It is a part of it, but there's people who take it too far. There's this Christian belief, but then there's the belief in the spiritual world. That played a lot in the family dynamics, and also how I was socialized. Going to school, being very paranoid, not really making any friends, being afraid of people. My whole transgender identity, it all stemmed from sexual abuse. I know this now. For so many years, I was in denial. I was so confused. I was lost. One day, my dad caught me dressing up as the opposite sex. I got into an argument with him. He kicked me out of the house, and that's when I started to become homeless. Since I got away from my parents, I just went all the way into the trans community. Like they took me in. They accepted me. I was pretty much more or less indoctrinated. I was very vulnerable. I didn't have any support because of my upbringing. I didn't have any friends. When I ran away, I was by myself. The doctors didn't help me. They knew about my sexual trauma. They knew about all these other issues. I really don't believe their intentions were good or pure or wholesome, because Kaiser Permanente, they have a gender clinic.
I can't believe I'm actually telling my story here on air. It's something that was like deepest, darkest secret for 41 years.
They decided that transition was the right thing for me. My therapist, he's the one that sent the referrals for my facial feminization surgery and my vaginoplasty. I got into the gender affirmation model. It's euphoria in the beginning. In the short run, it's like this obsession with oneself. I had a mental breakdown and got into the hospital, the emergency room. From there I went to a psychiatric hospital. spent a couple of days there. I believe I was discharged this whole on and off time that I've been like identifying as trans. My sexuality did not change. I'm attracted to women. So I desisted, and I think this was probably 2015 or so. Tried to live with my father again. He convinced me to desist. I had a very unstable identity, and I do contributed to the sexual abuse. Basically, my formative years, it created that confusion and that dissociation of self. My case is a classic case of adverse childhood experiences. The therapist that I was working with, they were pretty much affirmation care. All they're going to do is affirm that you're trans, basically. They focus on just one issue. We didn't work on, my other mental health diagnoses, because I was diagnosed with bipolar, schizophrenia, PTSD. They made up an issue for me because I was confused.
It would be good to know today for the film.
Georgia Luber. This is the first interview I've done as myself. I have an alter ego that I work from to stay anonymous that I've been using for the last 4 years, primarily to protect my family. But I think we're at a point where this conversation needs to be publicly had as our real selves, because I'm not saying anything that I should be hiding. And I'm very concerned with the stuff that we're learning and the approach that we're not prepared for what's to come, which is a massive wave of detransitioned people and their grieving parents who were lied to. What a lot of parents need is the permission to question it, because I've heard anecdotal stories of people who've admitted that they question it and other parents going, wait, we can do that? And like, yeah, you can question it. If your whole body is saying, no, this doesn't make sense, then it would be great to go talk to somebody, not who agrees with everything you say, but just has a track for you to go on that isn't the gender clinic.
We're kind of squashed with this narrative. Would you rather have a living son or a dead daughter?
Their kids have the same script because their kids got it online or from their friends or from a Discord group. Supposedly it originated in one meeting, one time when somebody yelled it out and it was taken as gospel. And now here we are. Having talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parents, they've exponentially come to us more and more in the last year, primarily because of people speaking out. I don't give advice, and I make that really clear when people call, because you can't apply anyone else's story or all the stories I've heard combined to anyone's specific situation, because they're all very different, despite the fact that they have similarities. You might have kids that are willing to listen because they aren't sure and they love their parents and they don't understand why their parents are, it really depends on your situation. So if you have a kid that's completely immersed and what I would call radicalized, which is what a lot of parents are saying to us, I didn't introduce that term to them. Suddenly they went from being like an affable college student to somebody who wanted to go kill people or sacrifice their life for something or whatever. So it's an indoctrinated mind. And so you have to be aware that direct hits don't work with that. So the most important thing that they will tell you with indoctrinated people is that you have to build rapport and trust. The hardest part about this is differentiating between normal teenage stuff and the gender piece, because there's a lot of crossover. So I would just really encourage people to focus on the relationship first, because you really can't accomplish anything until you have that solid. It's all out there. It's a matter of you as a parent figuring out what is going to resonate with them. And then some people have had success with just moving and going to the middle of nowhere and stripping their kid of all of their social media and getting them connected to nature. That's not an option for most of us. I have seen, and this is obviously my observation, this isn't evidence or proof or anything, it's just my observation with the people that I've talked to, is that this is filling a hole for a lot of these kids. This is a space that's vacant, that is a normal part of being an adolescent. You're figuring out who you are. There's holes in our personalities until we figure out who we are. And this is a great one to just stick in there, because it absolves you from having to deal with the actual issues. It's just that you check the box, you get the medication and the surgery, and you're fixed. Nothing is fixed that way. You have to do the work. And I think that the idea of doing the work is too painful. It's about figuring out the origins of this, which, the law in some states is saying we're not supposed to be asking. And I'm like, this is a very strange approach to a mental issue, because it's in here. It's not something you're inborn with. The worst case scenario is that this train keeps going. And then we've basically lost an entire generation of kids to infertility and the long-term consequences, which are cancer, dementia. Like, I think it's unsustainable as a healthcare model, because not only are they not covering the detransitioners currently with insurance, but like you're just creating a much bigger problem down the road.
Do know as early as seemingly from the womb, and they will usually express their gender identity, some as soon as they can talk.
We need to grow our ranks. People need to start standing up and realizing that this isn't just about the parents. This is about everybody, because once they take away that, what's next? We're talking about a slippery slope here of letting politicians make decisions for us that they have no business making. Now, I'm not a fan of banning anything. I do think there's always going to be a bigger problem that results from that, or an equally big problem that results from that. But at this point, I'm all for the gender affirming care bans, because gender affirming care is a lie and it's experimental. They're acting like it's life-saving care when it's just not. And there's no evidence to back that up. And every systematic review has repeatedly come to the same conclusion based on all of us looking at the same evidence. Something tells me there's too much money in this for them to honestly say like, oh yeah, we were wrong. Don't socially transition. Don't push them on puberty blockers. Just let them grow up and figure it out. And then if they still feel that way, then they can make an educated decision. But I still feel that it's experimental for adults. They don't really know what it does to you long term.
There's no even long-term study. So they're conducting an experiment on children. We have no idea what the consequences are.
And they won't for a while. And so those people are guinea pigs. And I think part of the reason that they're guinea pigs is because societally, they're not really accepted. And that's a terrible thing to do. You're basically performing experiments on people who you consider to be fringy, and you're getting away with it out of the goodness of there's something really creepy about it to me. But they can't tell you if your uterus will atrophy. They can't tell you if you'll get dementia. They can't tell you what's going to happen to you because they don't know. And they openly say that they don't know. Interviewing Dr. Olson Kennedy, the callousness and the casualness with which she described.
Adolescents actually have the capacity to make a reasoned, logical decision. If you want breasts at a later point in your life, you can go and get them.
It's time to stop being afraid, because we're right about this. Find radical self-acceptance, because to me, that's the goal. That should be the goal. And right now, that's not the goal.
Hi, my name is Dustin.
I lived 10 years as a woman. I was born in '82, so it was like '96. And I was experiencing a lot of different, feelings, incongruences, sexuality, puberty, hormones. I knew something didn't quite feel right, wanted to learn why that was. And, these feelings kind of propelled me into a direction of self-exploration, I guess, if that makes sense. The derivation of these feelings wasn't from outside influence. It was this feeling that came about, and I understand that. I grew up in a very traditional way, into sports, 27 when I transitioned, and lived that way for 10 years. Kind of engaged with the medical community to kind of figure out how to expand on this, try to develop. Hormonally sort of transitioned through pharmaceuticals prior to socially transitioning. 10 years later, I was, in a very secure situation. I was married at the time to my wife, and we were together for a few years prior to that. My life was taking off. I never felt better, actually, for a period during my transition. It was during COVID, where during that time, the world had time to ponder and start to think about what's truly making me happy. And transition, solved a lot of problems, but it also created a lot of problems. And it created problems that I'd never really considered. Those problems became a little more magnified. And there was time available to investigate those problems. During that time, I decided that it wasn't that my journey was over. The journey needed to turn around and pursue other alternatives to this lifestyle. Some of the problems were still sort of personal, body incongruence. I never identified as a trans woman. I identified as a woman. I always thought that trans, it's more of a verb. It was a process. When you go through the formal process of transition, there's like a checklist of things you have to do. The ultimate sort of end game is surgery. Pretty much went all the way to the end of that process, aside from surgical intervention. When you solidify yourself as somebody of the opposite sex, you make friends with people of that sex. And you're included in conversations, you're included in spaces. In conversation, talking to cis women, and they would ask me about my experiences, and I was never outwardly living as a trans woman. I was living as a woman. And so it started to like make me understand that I didn't understand a female adolescence. I never experienced that male gaze. I never experienced some of the challenges that young women experience today. And that didn't diminish my identity, but it made me question the validity of my participation in these spaces. I spent my life trying to hide Ashlyn. And then when I lived as Ashlyn, I spent all my time trying to destroy Dustin, trying to erase your former identity to validate your current identity. I wasn't necessarily ashamed of this process, but I certainly wasn't proud of being this person, because it was a really tough process to go through, and it was a very private process. And I just wanted to live a normal life. It wasn't any one instance, it was just a culmination of the pressure of perpetuating this identity moving forward, that I realized that I missed Dustin. I missed sharing my experiences. I missed sharing, my childhood memories with my friends in my friend groups. I grew tired of revising history to suit my current narrative. That wasn't healthy, and I just wanted to live an authentic life and honor my individualism and honor myself in a way that was meaningful and valuable to the people around me. And I couldn't really be that person because I was afraid of feeling, like an outsider. And I engaged with the medical community at a very low place. Mental health professionals, doctors, etc. And when you come to somebody and you're asking for advice or guidance or help, doctors and professionals, they're coming at you with, here's the solution. Here's the checklist of things that you need to do. I don't think that cookie cutter solution is the right thing to do. I think, especially if you're a young kid, there doesn't have to be a medical intervention. There doesn't have to be anything to solidify the beauty of yourself, and I think it's unfortunate now because we're so, as societally, we're very into categorizing and labeling people just so we can understand them and get clarity on who we think those people are. We're all unique, and knowing that there are young kids out there exploring their own persona, exploring their own individualism, I think is a really good thing. I mean, that's what we're supposed to do when you're a young kid. And you're supposed to have the safety and support to try on different identities. And I understand that. And I support that 100%. However, there are long-term consequences and long-term permanent things that can happen when you medically intervene into some of these lives. The medical community, this whole arena is in its infancy, and we don't understand how to honor the gradient of young trans kids. And so we have a systematic approach to this very individual experience, and that's not good. That doesn't increase positive outcomes at all. They're trying to understand girls, boys, people of authority, what job to take, what college to go to. If you lump in a medical transition to the opposite sex, that's a lot. That's a heavy load there to try to understand on yourself. So you obviously want to engage with somebody that has experience. When I came down those stairs that day, I felt these sort of feelings that I have never felt before in my life. And it was a calm. It was like I was meeting an old friend again when I decided that affirming Dustin again, or for the first time, really, it felt so true and so pure that I had never felt that before, ever in my life. Pre-transition or during transition, I never felt that clarity until I decided to return to trying to just further my understanding of this process and in this, I don't want to say condition, but it was definitely something that's it's not it's not fun to go through when you're hopeless and you're depressed and you're like, why do I feel this way? It sucks. It's terrible. When I decided to finally say, I just want to be myself and detransition back to Dustin, my wife and I had never had such an embrace that was that special and that authentic. She knew that there was a side of me that I would always put in the drawer. The dynamics of our marriage was prioritizing Ashlyn's identity. The priority now is our baby, our little boy. I met with a fertility doctor and provided a few samples, and he was like, for whatever reason, you're probably more likely than not able to have biological children. And at that moment, we were both sitting there just floored because I had been on hormones and testosterone blockers for 8-9 years and pretty high doses. And so my body was able to recover only after a few months to have children the good old-fashioned way. But I'm always a believer of the real priority is the strength of our marriage. And in order to be effective parents, we need to have effective bonds. And we have never been closer. The priority is balance and understanding and consideration and reciprocation in many different ways. Happiness is not a destination. It's a process of continuous self-healing and understanding and exploration. And I feel the same way about gender transition. This was definitely a journey that I needed to take.
The guidance that I received was, if you transition, that's going to make you happy. And that's not necessarily always true. So I hope you like. Talk to you soon.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system. The mailbox is full and cannot accept any messages at this time. Goodbye.
New Texas law banning gender-affirming medical care for transgender children will be allowed to take effect. Transgender minors in Texas will not be able to access hormone therapies, puberty blockers, and transition surgeries.
My ultimate life goal is to have a family, find a base husband and procreate, have a nice family and homeschool and kind of do that down-to-earth hippie kind of thing.
You say it won't be hard to cut the population by 1/4?
It just takes one generation to get a population down if nobody bred for one generation.